go to something that you and your Democratic colleagues are working on in the Senate, and that is a code of conduct for the Supreme Court. I mean, this is something that you introduce regularly, but we did get a response this week from Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, and he said, quote, "I know this is a controversial view, but I'm willing to say it. No provision in the Constitution gives them, meaning Congress, the authority to regulate the Supreme Court, period." What do you think he is saying there, and what is your response?
First of all, it's just stunningly wrong. And he should know that more than anyone else, because his seat on the Supreme Court exists only because of an act passed by Congress. It is Congress that establishes the number of justices on the Supreme Court. It is Congress that has passed in the past requirements for justices to disclose certain information. And so it is just wrong on the facts to say that Congress doesn't have anything to do with the rules guiding the Supreme Court. In fact, from the very beginning, Congress has set those rules. But it is even more disturbing that Alito feels the need to insert himself into a congressional debate. And it is just more evidence that these justices on the Supreme Court, these conservative justices, just see themselves as politicians. They just see themselves as a second legislative body that has just as much power and right to impose their political will on the country as Congress does. They are going to bend the law in order to impose their right-wing view of how the country should work on the rest of us. And it's why we need to pass this common sense ethics legislation to at least make sure we know that these guys aren't in bed having their lifestyles paid for by conservative donors, as we have unfortunately seen in these latest revelations.
This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. That video sets up the battle royale between the Supreme Court, Sam Alito, and the Senate Democrats over whether we are finally once and for all going to have a U.S. Supreme Court that adheres to a code of conduct, a code of ethics, mandatory disqualification, the disclosure of financial interrelationships and entanglements between parties before the court and judges sitting up on that bench. Are we going to have that, or are we not? Are we a country of law or of men? Which is it? It can't be both. And this constant, ridiculous struggle where the Supreme Court says we're above ethics, we're above codes of responsibility. Really? I mean, last I looked, you're people, human beings that put on your pants one at a time, and you're given the highest honor in the country, being confirmed to be one of 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices for a lifetime appointment. You don't think that comes along with responsibility? Certainly Chris Murphy does, and Chris Murphy's just schooled Judge Alito and told him, I don't know what you're talking about. It is that he's flabbergasted by 2 things. One, the fact that Alito, who's supposed to be part of the judicial branch, has intervened in the world of politics and is effectively lobbying Congress and getting in the middle of the legislative branch. Separation of powers, co-equal branches occupying their own spheres. You're not supposed to color outside the lines and do it so blatantly and transparently. It's the only thing transparent about Sam Alito is his transparent lobbying politically, because he's trying to tell his bosses in Congress, because they are, and Chris Murphy just told him why, that he's above the law, that he's above ethics, and he's above transparency when it comes to his financial entanglements with right-wing people. So you saw how we got there. That was Chris Murphy today or a Sunday morning talk show responding to Sam Alito. But the Wall Street Journal article was from a couple of days ago. And that article, written by Paul Rifkin and James Tarante, is entitled Samuel Alito, the Supreme Court's Plain-Spoken Defender. That was the title of the article. And buried in the article, which was a 4-hour interview that Sam Alito gave, it was like a very fawning puff piece put out by the Wall Street Journal, 4 hours, calling Sam Alito at one point an important justice with a distinctive interpretive style. That's one way of putting it. But during that interview, he said, and I quote, and you can hear it in Chris Murphy's video that I played, that he says, I know this is a controversial thing to say, but Congress, nowhere in the Constitution There's no provision of the Constitution that gives Congress the authority to regulate the Supreme Court, period. Meaning, back off, you don't have the right or the ability to impose a code of conduct or a code of ethics on the Supreme Court. And you heard Chris Murphy said, what are you talking about? It is Congress. It is Congress's power by which Sam Alito and the others, their seat even exists, right? That was an act of Congress. It's an act of Congress that sets the number of Supreme Court justices. It's Congress that passed and imposes financial disclosure obligations on the Supreme Court. And it's Congress that controls the purse string. All the money that John Roberts is spending as the head of the judiciary, the judicial branch, for all of its court system and court personnel and judges and clerks and courthouses. You ever seen some of these courthouses? These limestone buildings running $300, $400, $500, $800 million a piece in cities. That has to be approved through Congress. Okay, they don't have their own slush fund, not that I'm aware of, to pay for that. So to say that Congress has to back out and not have oversight over a branch for which they fund, right, just shows you the depth of immorality and really intellectual dishonesty being practiced by Sam Alito and the others. Sam Alito, who of course got caught up over the summer in the ethics scandal. It's not just Clarence Thomas taking millions of dollars of vacations with right-wing extremists and Nazi memorabilia collectors, like the heir to the Trammell Crow fortune, and not disclosing it, or selling his property, including his family homestead and other vacation property, to other right-wing MAGA people who have business in front of the court. Sam Alito did it too. He's taken Alaskan, glamping luxury camping trips in fishing lodges that the average person would never be able to afford, paid for by, the founders of the Federalist Society. He's dined in private homes with people on the right-wing Christian right who have business in front of the court without disclosing it. So of course Sam Alito is hurt by it, but don't forget who Sam Alito is. He's also the one that probably leaked through his office the Dobbs decision when it was in draft form in order to ensure that it would be voted in passed, right? Taking away a constitutional right for a woman to choose and have bodily autonomy. That Dobbs decision, that's Sam Alito. And good on Chris Murphy and Sheldon Whitehouse for taking on the U.S. Supreme Court, because if they don't do it, who's going to? You see the megalomaniacal approach by the U.S. Supreme Court. We're above it all. Really? You were just human beings when you were being confirmed and begging for the job, saying anything that would get you through the confirmation process, even things that we now know were untrue about your respect for precedent. We know you lied your way, most of you lied your way through the confirmation hearings that you each had. Clarence Thomas, we know what you did related to your prior sex harassment and discrimination allegations, and Anita Hill. We'll leave that aside for a minute. The rest of you lied about what you would do if you were ever faced with a challenge to Roe v. Wade. And you got a lifetime appointment. And then you're telling me we also can't regulate you? We can't make what you do transparent? We can't mandate how you're going to be disqualified? That is what Senate Bill 359 does, Sheldon Whitehouse's bill. That's what we're talking about, right? That is the Supreme Court Ethics Recusal and Transparency Act. And as a side note to Chris Murphy, Senator Murphy you just heard from, he has literally introduced every year for the last 10 years a similar bill to add a code of conduct to the U.S. Supreme Court and its justices, and it's gotten shot down every time. Whether Democrats were in control or Republicans were in control, there's Chris Murphy, offering that bill. But now with all the spotlight for all of the conflicts of interests and financial entanglement that we've seen primarily on the right-wing MAGA Supreme Court, it's time for the Senate to pass Senate Bill 359. The Democrats have the votes, they have the president waiting to sign it, and it needs to be done. And people like Sam Alito need to take their big noses and get it out of politics and lobbying. You don't see John Roberts doing that. John Roberts refused to appear in front of the Senate committee. because he said it would be political and there's a separation of powers. Sam Alito said, well, I'm giving a 4-hour interview with the Wall Street Journal. I'll say whatever I want. Right. And as soon as Sheldon Whitehouse pulls you in with a subpoena to the Senate committee and Chris Murphy joins, you're going to say, can't make it. Right, Sam? Is that right? You're going to say you're not available. Separation of powers wouldn't be appropriate. Then it's not appropriate for you to get on an interview with the Wall Street Journal and have you attack Congress and what they're only trying to do for the American people, which is to have a out of control Supreme Court, a rogue Supreme Court reined in and subject to the exact same code of ethics and code of conduct that House members, senators, and every other judge in America, state or federal, is subject to. That's all we want, Supreme Court. And I'm sorry that you think you're above it all in your ivory tower. But if you want to start rebuilding any level of credibility with the American people, that branch of government literally has none at this point, this would be a good starting place. Don't give interviews to attack S-359, the bill in the Senate. Support it. And Justice Roberts, you lead. You be the moral leader and do that too. We'll continue to keep your feet to the fire here on hot takes just like this one, only on the MeidasTouch Network. That's where me, Michael Popok, that's where I do all my work at the intersection of law and politics. Watch us on Legal AF every Wednesday and Saturday because we pull all this together, these kind of stories. We curate them at the intersection of U.S. law and politics. Follow me on all things social media at MS Popok. This is Michael Popok, Legal AF reporting.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.